Hello, everyone, and welcome back to yet another episode of WagMe TV, episode 15 today, the big 1-5. And we're back with the absolute fellas. As always, we got the Doctor, Doc Mata. We got the NFT Lord himself, Alex Garcia. And we got the All-American, Ev Smith. How we doing, boys? Got a little cheers?
Cheers.
Doing great.
Well, we're all good. Evan's a little sick.
Yeah.
So wish our boy well. He still was able to hop on. So
Evan is absolutely
love to see
powering
him.
through here for our fans. The man is fighting through COVID
Got
every
him.
last breath.
100%. No scotch today. I got a little mixture of carrot juice and orange juice, a little COVID potion. So
Exactly. You just add the scotch afterwards.
yeah, right. Yeah, no, it's been a tough week, but we're here and we're ready to get into it.
We're ready to get into it. So,
Glad to have you.
so as always, starting with a little bit of macro talk, it almost feels like it's kind of the calm before the storm here. We've been anticipating this June Fed meeting for quite some time. And so we're looking forward to it next week. Just to see, get some more guidance as always on where things are headed. But seems like a little bit of calm before the storm. I know, Ev, can you go into a little detail? I know you had in terms of like the ECB and kind of things that they announced and the impact that they had. Would be interesting to hear a little bit of more of a global picture.
Yeah. And I think at the end of today, you saw markets take a sharp downturn. I think I saw the SPY was down almost 3%, probably 2.5%. And we could pull that up, but that was really news coming out of the European Central Bank, the ECB, just like, the Fed is the US central bank, ECBs for the Euro and the European Union. But they announced that they'll do their first interest rate hike coming up here in the next month. And they're planning by September to take their rates to zero. So at the moment, the ECB has set the rates at negative 0.5, which is kind of crazy to understand in US terms, because I don't know if we've ever had a negative interest rate. But yeah, they're basically doing a quarter basis point hike for each of the next couple months. And it's actually pretty big news because it's the first time in 8 years that they're not going to have negative interest rates. I think during 2020 and 2021, we saw the US throw out a ton of COVID packages to help stimulate growth in the economy. There were still packages that the ECB sent out to the European Union to help stimulate the economy there, but there were much lower amounts. And so you didn't really see the amount of inflation that we have here in the European Union, which is kind of the reason behind their delay of increasing these rates. But yeah, that was kind of the big news. Obviously the global economy is very well connected. And so having, money tightening going on in Europe, that's going to affect the US and the markets in Asia. So they're lowering their interest rates, but then they're also stopping their large scale bond buying July 1st. So
They're increasing their rates.
They're increasing their rates
from negative 0.5 to 0, right?
Yep.
Okay.
Negative 0.5 to 0. But then they're stopping the large scale bond buying that they've been doing the last couple of years.
So going off the quantitative easing, similar to what the Fed is trying to do here. You make an interesting point. I do, because there was so much monetary stimulus from the Fed during COVID and during that time. So we saw a lot of asset inflation. And I think you're right to say that we didn't see necessarily that amount of asset inflation in Europe and in other parts of the world. What's interesting now is the energy piece of the inflation puzzle is, if it's hitting us hard, it's hitting Europe very, very hard because of their, inherent tie to the entire Russia, situation and the fact that they get a lot of their energy from there. And so yeah, it's kind of interesting to see that like now they're trying to, handle that situation, even though it was kind of on a little bit of a lag. And definitely, I guess, may have taken the market by a bit of a surprise today. So we'll see if that's a leading indicator for, kind of the Fed next week. Yeah, Sia, Armada, do you have anything on macro stuff?
So in regards to that, so this this is kind of news to me. I did not know that, but we did see the equity markets take a pretty big dip there at the end of the day. So that kind of adds up. So I assume they're doing it like in the next coming months. Like one will be in July and then one will be in the fall sometime. Do we know like when was the last time that they increased rates in general? Because how long have they been, negative interest rates?
I'm seeing right now Eurozone interest rates set to rise for the first time in 11 years. That's on BBC.
So that lines up right about at the same time of the US too, since the last time we raised rates, about within the same couple of years at least.
Right. Following suit in a way.
Not
Doesn't
11
it?
years. We had raised rates like, during post 08 and stuff leading up to 2020.
So within a couple of years of that. So like 15 years.
Yeah, and I think another note here is that they got to deal with multiple economies rather than just one like we do. So I think they're a little slower to make these rates than maybe what we are. They've got to deal with a very weak Spanish, Italian, and Greek economy where I think it was a Wall Street Journal article I was reading that their debt sold off super heavy at the end of today, and I think that's probably what we saw in the equities markets as well. But yeah, coming into this year, they were singing the tune of they weren't going to make any interest rate hikes at all this year. It was going to come down the line in 2023, and so this is a little above or in front of schedule. Kind of like what we saw in the US where, we didn't feel like these interest rates were coming. And then now they're just, backing them up month after month, 50 basis point hikes. So we'll see, it'll be interesting how they attack it. And there's probably a couple of other central banks, maybe a Japanese central bank that it'd be interesting to see if they decided to increase interest rates. Or maybe other economies around the world.
Mm-hmm. No, definitely. I think just for everyone's context, let me just pull up the old economic calendar so we can kind of see where we're at here. So this is this week coming into tomorrow, big day tomorrow, CPI print tomorrow. Right ahead of the Fed meeting too. So, all eyes are going to be on this tomorrow, right and early 8:30.
Consumer sentiment too.
Oh man.
Yeah. This is going to for sure take the backseat to this though. This is going to be what everyone cares about tomorrow. And it's also, just days before the next Fed meeting. Obviously next week, in our next episode, probably we'll be chatting probably during or after this, FOMC announcement on Wednesday. And, all eyes going to be on that next year or next week. So just giving everyone a little bit of a heads up as to what's coming. But, obviously those two things going to be driving the market pretty heavily.
So what are we expecting out of the CPI numbers that are going to be coming out tomorrow?
Yeah, good question. Yep. So this is the forecast line. So right here. So median expectation is 8.2. So anything above 8.2, you could probably expect like pretty severe market reaction in terms of people are gonna think the Fed is gonna take that hawkish. But the thing is, everything the Fed has been saying is extremely hawkish. So like, I mean, they're basically saying like we're gonna carry through with these rate hikes, like, whether you like it or not. And so, there's still some people betting that they're going to back off, and that's always been kind of the bull case argument. But they just haven't yet. And so we'll see if they get any ammunition to maybe back off. But yeah, 8.2 is the number to watch tomorrow.
and I think one thing that I've always been interested in is like this number is taking the interest the interest from last year, or sorry, inflation from this month last year to this month this year.
Yep.
When you look at like the energy, the wheat, like these inflation drivers that are happening, this is all stuff that has happened like in the last 3 months. And so it would almost be more interesting to see if there was another metric around like a 3-month inflation indicator, because that would kind of tell you where we were before like the Ukraine and even the Chinese lockdowns, and kind of where we're at now. Because going from this point almost to last year, it seems like there's just so many different changes in the geopolitical like environment that there's a lot of factors that get priced into this number.
No, definitely. And it's going to be interesting because it's almost like I think it's called like base effect or something. It's like people were making the same argument back when, there were the Trump tax cuts. Is like, okay, like now, like all these profits are going to be inflated. So like the year over year number, the next year, like the base that you're working off of is that much higher, but you're not going to have that like additional tax revenue that you got, right? So similar thing here, like when you're looking at it on a year over year basis, there is some level of like base effect that plays into there. And like, then you think about what it's going to look like next year. If inflation does in fact like end up slowing down and stuff, like what's it going to look like then, with such a high, like, as you were kind of saying, like such a high, like base rate, to kind of compare it to year over year. So yeah, I think like they do have like the monthly figure here, but it would be kind of interesting to see it like quarterly basis or something like that. We could maybe rewind and take a look. But
and real quick, one last note on like the inflation numbers. I saw somewhere that out of that 8.3% that we saw last month, 1.3% were used car sales and used car parts. So that's an interesting note of like what's actually making up this number, that like used cars are still definitely getting priced into all this.
Yeah, that's interesting because I do remember seeing there's some evidence starting to come up where there might be some sort of slowdown in the used car market, things like that.
I think I sent that over in our chat. I thought that was the case. So that's interesting.
Yeah. So
and I think I'll keep going.
I was just saying it does take some time. A lot of the time, just it's not going to be immediate, right? It does take some time for these things to kind of roll over. So we'll definitely be keeping our eye on it. See, keep going.
I think I was saying I think we touched on a little bit of that, like the delineation between like what's happening with inflation and then the actual effect of inflation on the market, and like the kind of somewhat of like the lagging indicator. And like I feel like one of the big things is where is like corporate and consumer spending going. So like CNBC does this thing like on a quarterly basis where they interview CFOs and like get an idea of where they think the market's going. And basically every single CFO said that inflation is basically their number one business risk, business concern right now. Like aside from any of the, Russia, Ukraine stuff or anything else, like it's inflation and what that's doing to like their profits. And they're kind of bracing for a Dow below 30K. So that's another 9% fall from here for the entire market. Obviously it kind of depends where, interest rates fall and all that kind of stuff. But I think we're still yet to see, some of the effect on the corporate spending slowdown, and then also consumer spending, like you guys are saying with, some of the used car market metrics as well.
Cool. Definitely a lot to keep an eye on, but we're not going anywhere. We'll be here. We'll be here through it all. So. Awesome. Well, I guess we can get into a little bit more crypto specific stuff. I'm actually pretty surprised, given everything that's going on, that Bitcoin is still holding 30K. It's kind of good to see.
Kind of bumping 29 to 32 or 33, somewhere in that range, just kind of.
Right. But yeah,
Bitcoin's awaiting the Fed meeting too.
It sure is.
man.
But there was some we'd covered the ETH 2.0 merge in one of our previous episodes a couple of weeks ago, just doing kind of a deep dive there. And I believe there's some a little bit of an update on that front. So we wanted to, fill you guys in there. Amada, you guys want to take it away?
Yeah, absolutely. So like someone was saying, we were covering this a little bit last week. Basically as a step to make sure that the Ethereum merge in like August, September, fall area goes well, they're starting to test a lot of things and basically run an exact simulation of what it would look like when the merge actually takes place. So they created this Ropsten proof of work chain that basically is supposed to simulate like original Ethereum, like the original layer 1 proof of work Ethereum chain. And they merged it with the proof of stake beacon chain. And this happened on Wednesday afternoon. And so far, at least, nothing has gone wrong. So I think they interviewed Vitalik like 6 hours into it. And he was like pretty, he was still not sure what was going to happen. But at the same time, like now it seems like everything's basically gone according to plan. So that's some of the reason why some people are, I mean, at least I've seen on Twitter, like some people are talking, getting a little bit more buzzed about the Ethereum merge. But I think, there's still a lot of stuff that needs to be sorted out. But it's a good test to see that it actually like worked, like at least the test network worked, like from going proof of work and merging the code with a proof of stake chain, which the beacon chain is like an actual live chain. So that's, only half of the test was actually a test network. So it was still pretty impressive, at least from what the crypto community, I think, was expecting. I think they were probably expecting something a little rougher than that, but to see it pretty much go without a hitch is pretty impressive, at least from what I can gather.
Yeah, no doubt. And just for some context, the way I've heard kind of the Ropsten testnet kind of described is just like essentially a test environment. So like if you're building a dApp or something and you're a developer, you can use that testnet to basically get like fake Ethereum that's not worth anything to like see if your smart contract is working correctly, test it out and like understand if there's any bugs, see if like swapping and like different mechanisms within your smart contract are working correctly before you actually deploy it to the mainnet. And so it makes perfect sense that they, started with that to merge over. And, I assume they're going to be paying attention to people who are, testing and building on that Ropsten network, just like devs and stuff, like trying to, test their own smart contracts to see if there's any bugs or anything with the merge. But, it's almost like one of those things where it's like no news is good news, right? Like if it's quiet and like everything is working as planned and like there's not any huge news, then I guess so far it's fine, right? Like I don't know. What do you guys think?
Yeah,
no,
that's true.
100%. Keep going.
I think we're also right. I mean, I think I said this a couple of weeks back, right? We're also in a bear market. So even if there was good news, how much of an impact does it really make in a bear market? And on the flip of that, right? If you're in a bull market, when bad news comes out, how much of an impact does that really make, right? I mean, people are kind of made up their mind. They have their sentiment. Again, we're waiting for the Fed. So I think, this is a step in the right direction. And I think this goes to our point the other week where it's like, this is where the builders build and they can focus on that rather than all the hype and everything around it. So definitely very healthy.
Yeah. Was this something where I guess they opened it up for developers to now be able to use that?
So from my understanding, it was a select group that had been like basically like Ethereum had reached out to them, or they had to reach out to Ethereum, and they had a set of like a group of apps and projects that said they wanted to basically take part in it. And Vitalik was saying his biggest concern with the merge, at least from like a critical capacity or like critical failure standpoint, is if the Ethereum nodes like crash or glitch at all, like it's over, like it's game over. So like the Ethereum nodes are his biggest concern. And so that's what he said. Basically, the teams are monitoring throughout the whole like testing process, and they're basically gathering feedback with, these app developers, basically simulating the process of like in August, September. Oh, how are we gonna have to interact with developers that because there are thousands of projects on Ethereum, so that's another aspect. I don't know how they're gonna like do like client support for that merge. Like I doubt it's gonna be absolutely smooth, but that's another thing that's also on the table for them to figure out.
Yeah, And I don't know the timeline of, phase 1, 2, and 3 that well. But it seems like it's pretty close to launch to be, having your first tests on your test network to see, if it's working. So I wouldn't be surprised if that phase 2 got pushed out again, maybe towards closer to the end of the year. But no news is good news. So sounds like it went well.
It's just so
Speaking
crazy.
of,
Like our
go ahead,
entire
sorry.
our entire livelihood is in this man's hands. He's like, we're monitoring, like we're monitoring like day and night. Like I'm like, dude, thank you. I'm like,
Thank you, because if you weren't, I'd be really regretting where I put my money.
Oh man. But speaking of test nets and more specifically beta, chains and beta, our good friend Solana had another little outage this past week. Apparently halted by a bug linked to certain cold storage transactions. So another outage. Sol price started to slide a little bit as is expected, as what happens pretty much after each and every one of these. I don't even know what number we're at this point, but I guess kind of the same talk track, right? I mean, they're in beta. Institutions, crypto VCs, they don't seem to care too much about the outages, right? They're still backing them. There's still massive amounts of money behind Solana. So again, something to keep an eye on, right? I don't know how many times you can kind of go down without people, starting to turn another direction or go and find another chain. So the interesting part, they're still getting a lot of support. They're still getting a lot of that backing. One thing to keep in mind when it comes to this piece is some of these crypto commits. So over the past 3 months, even with the outage that happened, Solana actually has the greatest crypto commit. So again, right, it's like, people want to be on a fast chain. They're seeming to pick Solana for probably various reasons at this point. I'm thinking they're confident in the team. They think the team's solid. They think tech's solid. They like the languages, everything like that. So not a developer myself, but seems like a lot of teams are still, moving over to Solana, even in the midst of some of these things. So keep an eye on it. Still in beta, right? I think the
I
key
was just
is
like curious on the cold storage piece of that. Like,
yeah.
What exactly did it say in the article? Like, what exactly happened? Like, that's just like a kind of like a odd, like, it's like an odd reason to have a like shutdown.
Yeah, it was. To be honest, there was something about durable nonce transactions, and I don't know too much on that. So I'm probably not the person to ask on that front. Yeah.
So a nonce is basically like a randomly generated string of like alphanumeric characters, and it makes your transaction unique. Essentially, it's what you put in hashes so that like it basically makes it unique without like going into too much detail. What I could imagine is that like when you're talking about cold storage, it's something where it's not readily accessible on network, or from what I understand, like cold storage is definitely tougher to reach and slower to query than maybe a node or transaction that was sitting on a hot wallet or a hot node or something in that capacity. And so I figure there was probably a maybe duplicate, like nonce value.
That's exactly what it was. They were instead of treating them as kind of these niche inbounds, like a single transaction, right? Yeah. They were double counting those transactions at two different heights of the block. So nailed it. Super helpful. Thank you for diving in there. But yeah, it's exactly what it is.
Usually when you talk about a nonce, it's what's used to make things unique. And so the problems with those are duplicates or clashing, like is what you kind of call it. So yeah.
Oh, thanks for the context, Ev. That was a great explanation.
Yeah, guess my computer science degree came in handy for one.
I with all these coins, right, outside of Bitcoin and maybe Ethereum, right, for one of your top tier alts, if you will. I think it's just the same old, right? Have a longer term vision. Don't put all your eggs in one basket. Try to find something that's going to break things, do something new, be innovative. And so, I'm in Solana, full transparency, not financial advice. I don't know if it's great advice at this point anyways, but I'm keeping an eye on this. So,
and I think the biggest thing with this stuff is the way that you make these things even more unique is you just add characters to the knots. Like hashing algorithms, 5-10 years ago started out 256 characters long. Now they're 512. And that was because they had collisions that you could basically find ways to input something like, let's say I inputted in password 1, and then I also inputted password 2, and they spit out the same hash. Well, if that hash was sent to Facebook to log in with, I could log in as you. That's the idea of this, is you don't want duplicates. And so it's a fix that they just need to change their nonce, their hashing to make sure things are unique. So definitely not like a network problem, but it's an error that absolutely needs to be fixed.
Definitely.
Interesting. Cool.
That was super helpful. Yeah.
Yeah, that's
Thank
awesome.
you, Evan.
Ev's always got us on the deep comp side topics.
Some of it. Not Solidity or Rust. We'll have to go into that in the conversation.
Not yet. Not yet.
Not yet. He's learning.
All right. So I think, it has been, I think, like a few weeks since we've actually touched on anything to do in really the NFT space. And so we figured we'd take a little bit of time today, kind of give our viewers like a lowdown of kind of where things are at, and then some interesting news stories and kind of narratives that we might be kind of keeping an eye on. So, I mean, I have to open up with the NFT Lord himself. Sia, you want to give us a little rundown on kind of what you're seeing in terms of where the market is, what you're seeing, and how it kind of feels just from like somebody who's been in the space for a while? Like, what is the general sentiment kind of like right now?
Yeah, that's a great way to kick things off. And I we were talking about this earlier, but I think there's a general feeling and hankering for more real world utility, as opposed to, hey, you're going to get this token that's redeemable in this specific world or whatever it is. There's kind of a more craving for, hey, how is this going to like impact my daily life beyond it being a cool picture, beyond it being a cool profile picture, or a status symbol. Obviously that's always going to be like Gucci always sells, right? So Bored Apes are always going to be popular, right? Like that's if NFTs are still around, but in terms of like mass adoption, what's going to get us there and what's going to push NFTs in the next direction is, I think, what everyone's kind of hungry for. So you see, we were talking about the incredible spaces from Royal Music, the NFT company, but music NFTs, like that wasn't something that people were talking about even 6 months ago. And now, I think people were talking about it, from a standpoint of like, oh, that'd be cool if we could incorporate it into the NFT technology. But now, like, there are actual, artists that are using music NFTs, and like they're a thing. They're like a real full-fledged thing. There's companies being built around it. And I think it's just going to go more and more towards that. Like I've seen a lot of projects that are up and coming now that are offering a lot of like in real life sort of like kickers. So like there's one where like you get like one flight a year on a private jet. There's one where you get like, just like weird stuff like that, where it's like it's providing real world stuff that you can go and do. Now that's a very like specific example, but it's more so saying, hey, like how do we actually bring this into like a real world ecosystem like the music industry? So that's kind of what we're seeing now. And I think that's why we're seeing a lot of this kind of shift towards, okay, is it going to be a legit game? Is it going to be a legit real world use case? Or is it really just like a picture, And I think we're starting to see that kind of shift.
Absolutely. I think like there needed to be at some point, at some time, like where we just kind of like dump the garbage, like just take the trash out, and it feels like we're kind of like either getting to that point or pretty much at that point, right? And all the bears are celebrating. They're like, oh, like NFTs were bullshit. Like, you know, we told you so, and like all of that. And like, yeah, I mean, like the skeptics are always like right to like a certain extent, right? Like there were a ton of pump and dump projects. There were a ton of rugs. There were a ton of like totally malicious scams, right? Like that, there's just no doubt about that. But it's kind of the time now where, you know, that stuff's going to get kind of phased out. It's just going to go extinct. And we're going to, just like you were alluding to, like, we're just going to kind of start figuring out like what the trajectory of this technology is with a real world use case, which is definitely very exciting. Ev, Armada, you got anything in terms of just general market feel? Otherwise we can go into you know, a couple news articles that we got.
I mean, I think it's extremely exciting, right? I think in the bull market, right, you get caught up in, like we were kind of talking about, a lot of the hype. And like you just said, right, in a bear market, you kind of can flush out some of the BS, right? And so now we get to see what NFTs can really be more than, you know, what they were in the past, right? So now is when all the development's going to start happening. Now is when we can kind of really push this space forward. Something that I was actually reading today, it's a Bloomberg article that I'll share real quick. How chief technology officers are investing big in the future. So this is over the next 12 months. It was an article from April. And so this was really interesting to me. Here are the top areas that they are going to be investing in the next 12 months. Cybersecurity, obviously, right? I think that's been a very, very hot topic. Marketing technologies, always kind of up there. But the interesting part is when you look at these kind of towards the bottom, right? Web3, cryptocurrencies, the metaverse. This is 3,000 executives across numerous industries, right? And so this isn't one specific industry. This isn't tech only, right? It was super interesting for me to see that people are really focused in this space and the growth and development that can come from it. And so if people are focused on this and they want to start investing in something like this, I'm really excited to see kind of what that next step looks like for us and where we can kind of take this from here.
Yeah. And I think the other interesting point of shifting people's focus into maybe music NFTs rather than profile picture NFT is that, like, you know, NFTs are a technology and the profile picture was a use case, but you know, that doesn't mean that like a technology works for every single use case. You know, you got to look at it from the end user perspective. And when you look at the profile picture NFTs, the end users were the crypto enthusiasts that have been in the ecosystem for a while, or we're trying to make like a quick flip, make some cash on it. When you look at the music use case, which I think we touched on last week, it's something where we're able to give disenfranchised people in an ecosystem more ownership by selling their own music, selling their own creations, you know, empowering artists, just like we've talked about in other episodes, where that's really who's going to benefit from Web3. And so I think that's like really cool, is that in the music direction, it feels like you're actually starting to sell the benefits rather than like selling what implementation you are using to like drive this benefit in somebody's life.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
So just a quick thought. Another thought on the other stuff that you talked about, Mata, was that my employer is also going into the NFT space. And I wasn't sure if, does anybody have an article on?
Yeah, I can pull that up.
NFTs?
I have it as well already.
And that it's just kind of goes to show, right? I think this sort of space and NFTs and things are here to stay, right? People are still interested in pushing this space forward, even in the state that it's in right now, right? And I think that's super important to keep in mind while we kind of dive deeper into this space as a whole.
And I think it's another example of how early everybody is in this space. You know, I think this is really the first like B2B NFT solution that I've heard of. And, you know, being an employee at Salesforce, and now this is completely public knowledge, so talk about it. But I think a lot of people are still trying to understand like how this can best be used. You know, when talk about Salesforce products, they're not B2C. It's not like Amazon where Salesforce is going to sell you, you know, a new desk and you're the customer in that engagement transaction. It's something where we're going to sell NFT Cloud to Amazon to then have Amazon sell NFTs to their customers. Exactly. And so like those discussions are, how can we sell or sell NFT to a company, NFT Cloud to a company that will draw brand engagement with their customers? Because that's the biggest thing with what companies are seeing NFTs can be used for, is bringing in more customer engagement, creating more connection between that customer and the brand, and doing that through NFTs. And so it's basically the same thing that, you know, Garcia's talking about, where, you know, having that free PJ flight once a year, or with the Links DAO NFT that we talked about, you know, having discounted drink and beverage and rounds at 5 Iron Golf. Like these are all ways that you're taking these NFTs for brands and having real world benefits for their customers. And that's, you know, that's the sentiment of Salesforce like NFT Cloud. So yeah, that's just a little precursor to the release of NFT Cloud. And I think it's something that a lot of those executives that Mata showed on that last screen are probably thinking of and want to see how they can use to create a better relationship with their customers.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. Like, I feel like it goes from, like, your point about use cases is so spot on, because like as a PFP profile, like it's more of like, it doesn't solve a pain point. Like it's more of like a luxury purchase rather than, you know, something that actually solves a problem. If you can turn, you know, if the NFT technology is turned into a use case where it actually solves problems for people, you know, that's when it's going to attract big money. Kind of how we talked about how if Ethereum replaces like a Visa solution or something, we talked about that a few weeks back. Like that's when the big money starts coming in. And like, I could see like, just like off the cuff, like if, you know, if Mata or I are selling to clients and each SKU is just an NFT and it's easily like editable, like within a smart contract where like all the legal stuff's already tied to it, all that other stuff's tied to it. I mean, like I could already see that eliminating hours from my process and all that kind of stuff, right? So like, that's just off the cuff, but there's all these like things that I'm sure Salesforce and the team there are starting to think about, you know, to kind of go off of what Mata's seeing in terms of the CTO sentiment. Like there's going to be a market there in 5 to 10 years, and they're trying to get ahead of that.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it's absolutely beautiful, right? I mean, we've nailed off what, 3, 4, 5, 6 use cases just right here, right? Between the 4 of us. Like, can you imagine some of these boardrooms where they're kind of running through kind of their specific product and what they can do, right? Like Evan was saying, right? Will it be consumer sentiment? Will it be bringing in brand pieces? I work kind of in the healthcare space in sales and consulting for a tech company, and I was reading this piece today because I often work with healthcare teams, and so just to add another use case to this, right? Medical ethics, right? A lot of medical ethicists love NFTs, right? And what is the reason behind that, right? They can give more patients more control over their medical data, right? Allow them to keep track of what those samples look like that are taken from their bodies, which is not the case right now, right? And so, right, some of these use cases, right, they can go back and forth, right? Not everybody's going to agree with this. I think this article has an individual, Lisa Lee, looks like she doesn't agree with this. Like, she doesn't think that this is going to be the case, right? But it's at least pushing the discussion a little bit forward, right? What can we utilize these for? How can we give people a little bit more ownership when it comes to, you know, things that really should be owned by them, right? And so this was a really interesting piece for me to come across that honestly in the end had nothing to do with my work, but I spent a good amount of time reading through it and thinking through it today. So thought I would share that as just kind of another use case on that, on top of that.
That's really cool.
No, that is interesting. And it's what's standing out to me, and like what I almost hear in a lot of what you guys are saying, the use cases, you know, we've almost thought of the use cases for NFTs almost for a consumer being just an individual. A lot of the times when, you know, over the last year and through this huge craze and now through this like downturn, right? when you guys are bringing up these business case use cases, one of the key things from if it's just purely based on retail is the fact that there's limited supply, right? Like anytime we're looking at NFTs and like what to mint and like what could be a good NFT and like stuff like that, we're looking at the supply. We're looking at like, what's the supply outstanding, like how much are listed, like what's the total max cap supply. It's all supply constrained, right? To try to drive this like rarity factor. When you start thinking about these business cases, and I think almost all the ones that you guys mentioned, there actually could be like, it's almost in those use cases, it's better to have an unlimited supply, right? And like whether it's the contract stuff that Garcia was talking about, whether it's like a user's or a certain person's like medical information, right? Like it's not necessarily like there's no supply cap there, right? But the technology is still, being used at the heart of it, right? And so that's like, I don't know, something that I just thought of right now that's like a key difference in kind of what you guys were saying, even on the brand side, like what Evan was talking about, right? Like there's no need for like a supply cap there, maybe in certain use cases, but it's almost like tailoring certain pieces of information to the relevant party, but having it like totally reproducible, basically, right? Having it completely be unique. So
yeah. And I mean, honestly, I think that's beautiful, right? I think one thing we touched on when we were covering NFTs really, really in depth, and like what should we look for when we're investing in them, yada, yada, yada. One of those things that we kind of came across is like, yeah, this is what NFTs are now, but like they can be so much more than what we're seeing right now that we can't even really comprehend at this moment, right? And I think NFTs, much like crypto and the bull market, everything like that, right? It was looked at as investment, which is why that supply cap was extremely important. Now, when you apply these other use cases, like you're saying, right, maybe that's not something that's super relevant for the actual technology itself. So absolutely, I love that.
Yeah, and it gets back to our discussion last week of creating that seamless user experience, how Audius creates that wallet for you as an end consumer. You're not seeing that, or you don't have to see it if you don't want to. That's the type of user experience that like NFTs are going to be used for in the future. A great thing like that could be used in healthcare as well. A lot of people aren't, too tech savvy, and creating those auto-generated wallets for them and allowing them to track their data samples and their NFTs that are connected to those wallets. That's the same user experience as Audius. So totally agree with that, Mano.
Yeah, it like brings the flexibility and the capability of smart contracts to a lot of these more like complex corporate use cases. So like where all you would need, like it's not like you need to buy a product, like all you need is it's still a lot, but you need like just a development team to figure that out. And you can start hosting your own NFT technology on whatever process or whatever system you want to do. Because if you're having a lot of these, especially in like patient sensitive information, stuff like that, like where user error like cannot be tolerated, things like active automated smart contracts are like invaluable. So I just feel like taking a lot of that smart contract technology and making it usable in a corporate sense is huge.
Absolutely. No, honestly, great discussion. I it just opened my eyes a lot, and I don't know, I'm learning a lot just from chatting with you guys.
Yeah, I mean, that's a super interesting point. Sorry to harp on this again, but this is obviously top of mind for me. But it's just so interesting. Even within that, you have multiple use cases within this, hospital health system piece, right? And tracking these, basically some of this data. So, I mean, think about patients owning an NFT of their medical data, right? That not only allows that information to be stored in a secure encrypted database, but then if they have that NFT, it would act kind of as a gatekeeper, right? Tracking who requested access, who was granted access, when they were granted access, right? Things like that. Recording all those actions kind of publicly, but locked behind, that database. Well, on the other hand of that, kind of what I was talking about, right? It's like patients could own that NFT of like some of their cells, right? That would allow them to track how those cells were then used down the road. I know that's a big thing. And maybe not something that would be super productive for, moving some technologies and innovations forward, but another piece of like kind of owning what should maybe be rightfully yours. Just kind of spitballing here, but what were you gonna say, Ev?
Like to that point you just finished on, that data is anonymous. Like that's the biggest thing in the healthcare field, is making sure that this data is anonymous, not personally recognizable. You talk about like, health studies that get released and the amount of data that has to be striked out because they don't want to be able to identify certain patients with certain conditions. You talk about scalability, accessibility, but that anonymous piece, keeping it decentralized, is so huge in that field. And I think that's something that could be applied to, credit checks, or something where a lot of people got identities stolen, and because of that, lives were ruined. Whereas if that data was anonymous, that wouldn't have happened.
And it gets rid of, like Sia saying, the user error.
Yeah, exactly.
Right. Wow.
Yeah.
I'm amped.
Now, this doesn't mean go buy a random NFT on OpenSea. This is not. This is not. That one is probably going to zero, so don't buy that.
On the note of like things that are still firing in this space, this caught my eye. This caught my eye because this company, this game Illuvium, which I think Garcia can maybe give us a little bit of an overview on, but I mean, they sold $72 million worth of land plots in the metaverse, and this is in a bear market. Like, you know what I mean? Like, things are, depending on the pockets and stuff that you're looking at, things are still kind of chugging. I don't know, like you said, Illuvium is like a pretty solid game, and it looks pretty solid in the research I've done, but you want to give a little bit of an overview? I don't know if you have a little gameplay demo or something.
Yeah. So just and if you want to pull your screen off, and I'll share mine with the gameplay, but basically it first got announced, like, I want to say spring of 2021 or summer. And then they released like their first, trailer, got everyone hyped, like maybe October of 2021. But since it got put out, and since like all of their engagements with the community have started, like it's basically taken the kind of like mantra of being like the first legit like AAA style game that's built on Web3 and integrated fully with NFTs. So it's kind of like this very like pretty like well made sort of like player versus player environment, where you can like you have cards that are also NFTs, like you play them out on the field. Your team battles versus another team. I believe there's also like campaign modes as well, but you can see like it's a very like this is like League of Legends style graphics, where it's like, you could see someone playing this on like a computer, or on like a, Xbox, whatever it is.
Definitely.
But this is like fully integrated with their token ILV. So they're going to have like, similar to what we've spoken about in the past with a lot of these projects, they'll have their own token. They have a lot of these kind of like claimable weapons and like upgrades for some of these monsters. You can buy some of these individual things, but that's on like its own market with Illuvium. So it's still technically in like a standard like beta phase, but they're releasing like the fully fledged game this year. So we'll see what happens. Like the land plot is kind of like the phase one of establishing the structure for the actual like entire community to play. But you can go in, log in, and play now. But it's not like widely available. But it's basically been like the most hyped crypto game, at least of the last like 6 months or so.
Wow,
that's awesome. And to Soam's point, I think back when we first started these, it's like these NFT games, they're all right and they're play to earn, but like who's playing them? And like we need the big gamers to actually like want to go in and play.
Mm-hmm.
The closer you make this to some of those massive games that we know and love, right? The League of Legends and things like that, right?
Yep.
The more, power users like that you're going to get, right? So I think that's an exciting step for at least the gameplay piece of the NFT market and kind of the play to earn area.
Definitely. No, something that just caught my eye, and figured I'd share it out with you guys. NFT still chugging it somewhere somehow. kind of gets us to that last point of like, just wrapping on what's like kind of the narrative that's happening here right now, right? And when I think of some narratives that I've seen, it's like, NFT volumes are dropping significantly, and like, just volumes are down altogether. Like, bears love to, harp on this sort of stuff. I tried to kind of dig in and look a little bit at the data that I kind of want to share with you guys, because I found something kind of interesting. So there's no doubt, right, that NFT volumes like have been falling, but when you take that statement as an overarching statement, like, of course that's true, but what's interesting is more of the dynamic of like where the flow is kind of getting maneuvered to. Even though the overall volume is dropping now that it's like a bear market, it's like, where is kind of the volume kind of being diverted now? And so what's interesting, so this is just a graph of like OpenSea, right? So you can see daily volume on OpenSea, kind of was significantly higher back in, early parts of the year, and is now tapered down and is kind of hanging around this, 30 million ish daily
Is that
volume.
massive spike this year?
I think this might have been like that day when like maybe some huge mint was happening or something like that.
Oh,
like,
that's right. Yeah, the big one that broke everything, right? What was that again?
Oh, other side, the
Yeah,
Bored
that
API
must
I
have
Club.
been
would
that.
I would be willing to bet that was that day, but I actually don't know.
Yeah.
No, definitely. Sorry to cut you off. Go
No,
ahead.
no, all good, all good. So yeah, we've kind of tapered down here, but what's interesting is, there are there's different there's kind of like a fragmentation happening within the NFT market, and it's kind of, I think, something we've talked about in the past, where is OpenSea going to be the king, or is there going to be another solution that pops up? And obviously a lot of different solutions have popped up, right? Looks Rare, some of these other ones. I know, we pulled up, I think there's one called X2Y2, which you look at the volumes on X2Y2 marketplace. I mean, since April, it's basically just like straight up, right? And so looking at some of these, double clicking and kind of looking a little bit deeper into the data of like what's happening within the NFT industry kind of paints a different picture, where, while the volumes are going down, there's still areas where actually they're seeing rapid growth, right? So I found that pretty interesting, this graph. And then there's this whole field of NFT aggregators. So Genie is one of them. And Gem is another one that's very popular. Basically an NFT aggregator like takes a bunch of different marketplaces and aggregates it together, so you can kind of get best price on the NFTs that you're looking for. And so what's interesting is when you look at this Dune analytics dashboard that tracks Genie and Gem, you can see kind of a similar story, particularly on the side of Gem, right? Like Gem is absolutely blasted off in terms of transactions and daily transactions, right? Like just absolutely spiking. And kind of tells you that like, okay, it makes you ask the question, like, is OpenSea kind of like losing their grip on what we thought would be, just kind of their place? They were the first movers, they had so much marketing, so much pickup, user growth and everything last year. And, as time goes on, like, I guess, I'd like to get your guys' opinion on it too, but, I was just looking into this data and found it all pretty interesting, trying to draw conclusions on it. Just seems like there's going to be a lot more competition within this space and a lot more fragmentation for users in terms of like more optionality too, right? So just thought it was interesting. What do you guys think?
I think it's probably just a fad, to be honest. I think that these aggregators are something that you've seen in almost every competitive marketplace where companies have APIs. So if you look at like Uber and Lyft, there was an aggregator for that, where essentially you could go to this app and look at and see whether Lyft or Uber was going to be cheaper.
Mm-hmm.
How they shut that down was they just restricted that aggregator from getting API access. They no longer could make those requests to get those prices. And so it's something in that relationship. It's the question of who has the power here and why.
But the difference here is that OpenSea doesn't have the items. The items are in users' wallets.
Yeah, but I don't think Genie has the items either. They're in the user wallets.
It's just a marketplace, but yeah, they're in the user wallets, but there could be different pricing on, like, people could be listing their, floor prices could be different on different marketplaces, right? Depending on where folks are listing. And so that's kind of like where the aggregation comes. Yeah, I don't even know if they're hitting. It'd be interesting to see the technologically, like, how this is working, because if you think about it, OpenSea actually owns none of the, none of the content that's on there. It's all in just people's wallets that are listing and exchanging them, versus a Lyft Uber example where, like, that particular driver and, like, that price is, like, set by Uber, right?
No, Uber doesn't own the cars, just like OpenSea doesn't own the NFTs.
But then the
I was
price is set.
thinking-
The price is set by
It's a
Uber.
marketplace, right? Just like the floor price is set by OpenSea.
OpenSea doesn't set the floor price. It's just the who the who's willing to take the lowest price.
But
the API that they're pulling from is an OpenSea piece where that's where the floor price is, right?
exactly,
They're not pulling from the individual's wallets to get the prices. Maybe I'm totally off here.
Yeah, they can only pull it if it's listed.
exactly. And so it would be like if there was only one Uber driver out in New York compared to 100,000 Uber drivers, like, that's going to shift the prices as well. Uber can't decide when surges and non-surges happen.
Yeah.
That said, I don't think this necessarily takes away from your point, Soham, that there's going to be other competitors in the space that are marketplaces in general. What I would love to know is, like, these gems, these other ones that you showed. Like, I know that the chart is kind of up and to the right now, but they're also much newer than OpenSea was, right? Like, were they operating during the bear market? Like, what is the comparison? Like, is OpenSea still kind of that massive player in the space comparatively? Like, you know what I mean? Like, in comparison, what do those charts look like versus, like,
Oh, for sure.
Oh yeah,
I think
OpenSea has
OpenSea
lion's
definitely.
share, probably, like, it's between 80 and 90% of all NFT volume.
So they're doing
And then
daily
it goes-
volume of like 30 million. Like, what are these other guys doing? Daily volume of.
And it's funny because
What
they
is
might
this,
have to kind
like,
of change what that brand looks like based on all the use cases that we've
What's-
kind of come up with, right? Like, the NFT marketplace, but, like, is it really just more an investment for this and that? Like, a lot of the use cases that we just kind of brought up won't be like things that are listed on OpenSea, right?
Right.
So
Mhm.
that's
Yeah, I
another
think that's
interesting
why-
thing to think
Yeah.
about.
I think that's why Salesforce is hopping in there. They want to be the OpenSea of B2B, I mean, and if they do that, and if NFTs are actually, a viable solution for people companies are going to want to not have to worry about learning all about Web3. They're going to want the NFT technology now if it's going to make a difference now. And having Salesforce, not only have the marketplace, but probably, I'm assuming, with how smart Benioff is, they're going to have a consultancy implementation program with that. They're going to have all of this expertise backed by where it's like anyone, no matter what CTO you are, you can have NFTs for your company, whether you have Web3 knowledge or not. And I think that's going to be, if they can do that, that's kind of like the big, gap that gets bridged. But
So what's
don't know.
interesting, what I'm looking at right now, like the 7-day moving average for volume on X2Y2, which is not an aggregator, just another exchange, is about 15,000 Ethereum. That isn't that far behind $30 million, if I'm not mistaken. I don't know. We're at, like, what, 1,800 ETH right now?
Yeah, something like that.
Yeah, like, that's pretty much, like, especially as like a very new operator, like, that's like a lot of headway in a very short amount of time.
that is, yeah.
Yeah, but my question is, and maybe this is probably for Garcia, do people have problems listing on OpenSea because of OpenSea fees, or is it like the Ethereum fees that you would find anywhere? Like, is the problem with OpenSea is no?
No. I mean, it's more about, so, I mean, the thing is, the problem could become OpenSea if, let's say, another platform, and I think this is part of what X2Y2 is trying to do, is they're trying to basically mitigate the gas fees as much as possible by offering, like, more specific ways to list your NFTs and to buy them. which is kind of what the aggregators are trying to do. But right now, no, it's more of it's an Ethereum problem. The gas fees are just ridiculous. But like to your point, Evan, if, like OpenSea will probably maintain that dominance until it becomes like an OpenSea problem,
Right. Because that aggregator only takes customers away from OpenSea. It's not like OpenSea is dying to get X2, Y2, their users, right? They already have enough of the market share, but they're in defense mode. They're not in the offensive mode. And so that's why I just don't see these aggregators working well with OpenSea down the road, because it only hurts OpenSea. And it's not like they're financially obligated to allow these things to exist. Users can go over to these other platforms on their own, So that's just my take. Probably the bear case.
No, I think it's
fair case on aggregators.
I think I'm
That's
gonna
a
do
good
a little
point.
bit more research on like mechanically how it works, but
Because I love the idea. I
For,
mean, imagine something with Uber and Lyft where you could, like, I do that all the time, where
Yeah.
I'll like see which one's cheaper, but I have to go to each app in order to do that.
Well, there
Right.
was something that
Yeah. I mean, it's a brilliant idea.
yeah. The Acquired podcast that I listened to, one of the founders made that and got a ton of funding, and then they just shut down the API access.
And then they were done.
All right, I don't have a company anymore.
Crazy.
Yeah.
Tough. All right. Well, guys, awesome chatting as always. Awesome just overall conversation. I really enjoyed this one this week. So to the viewers, hopefully you guys did too. We'll definitely be keeping a pulse on all the macro stuff, and definitely keeping you guys updated on any NFT news and everything that's happening in the Web3 space. If you enjoyed it, if you liked it, if you found any of it useful, definitely like and subscribe down below. Shoot us a comment. Let us know what you think. And yeah, we'll see you next week. Same time, same place. Wag me.
Later.
Later.